So, Hare Krishna,
Hare
welcome
Krishna.
to our fourth principle and value, which is realistic and positive vision.
Um, I'd like to talk a little bit about one aspect of marriage which can cause complications in terms of realistic vision of marriage, and that's the dynamic of the honeymoon stage of marriage. And I don't like to reduce love to a chemical equation, um, but in a
But it
sense,
is.
it is. Our bodies actually produce something called pheromones. And it's a type of hormone, and we become attracted to someone because of certain types of pheromones that we both have, and that creates this sense of a mutual attraction. And when the couple becomes more associated, their bodies begin to produce other hormones such as oxytocin and what's the other hormone? Oxytocin and slips my mind. But these hormones give you a sense of well-being, of even euphoria, and in a sense, that's falling in love, but it's not really love. It's what love feels
Feels
like.
like.
So in the beginning, because there is this feeling of euphoria, it feels like you're walking on the moon. You can't see any faults in your spouse. You're totally focused on the things you have in common. And it's a very wonderful experience. Although naturally, in due course of time, the amount of those hormones in your body subsides. And at that point, the couples, they begin to discover that they do have some differences. And because they don't have that chemical override of those endorphins giving them that intense pleasure, they may start to think that, well, maybe I married the wrong person. Somehow the things that attracted you to your spouse, maybe they were very organized, and that gave you a sense of stability in your life, and maybe they were attracted to you because you were a little relaxed, and that kind of helped them become a little more easygoing. But in that second stage of marriage, maybe it starts to annoy you that your spouse is maybe a little too fanatical about being organized, and maybe they come a little disturbed that you are too relaxed, and maybe you're not punctual. So the differences become prominent at that stage in marriage. And that is 100% normal. It happens to all couples. However, we have this sometimes a very unrealistic expectation that the honeymoon stage will last forever. And unfortunately, many marriages end when couples come to that stage when they begin to discover their differences and they don't really realize that there's some work involved there. So in a sense, marriage doesn't make you happy. Marriage will not make you happy. Marriage will
Makes
make you married.
married.
And when you become married, then you can begin to do the hard work of becoming happy and satisfied and peaceful in marriage. But that involves some effort on our part. And if you actually do that work and get the understanding of what actual love is on the spiritual platform, then you can actually have a meaningful relationship.
So we all have so many expectations that we enter marriage with. And that's okay as long as they're positive and realistic. We can have negative expectations because of what we've seen in our family of origin. We see a very high divorce rate. We get suggestions sometimes from spiritual classes that family life can be Maya because it involves so many material so-called material things, that we get entangled in. So it can sometimes be considered maybe like a fall down. So that's not a very realistic expectation to go into married life with. Rather,
that's a very unhealthy expectation.
So we want to try to have a positive expectation. At the same time, it has to be realistic. And one of the places that we need to start with our realistic expectations is seeing, am I ready for a relationship? Do I know why I want to marry? Is it for the right reasons, for positive reasons, with positive expectations? And, am I really ready to give up a single life and become we? It's not all just about what I want when I want it. Can I actually serve another person? Can I cooperate? Can I tolerate their idiosyncrasies? There's always going to be our expectations, but life never lives up to all of our expectations. We always have to calibrate our expectations as we go along. We learned that when we're a kid, we want something for our birthday and our mom gets us something else. So we had an expectation, but we have to somehow learn to manage our disappointments. And that requires good communication skills so we can express them in positive ways. So we do need to see if we are mature enough to realize our expectations, to see what we need in a partner. Those are all internal reflections that we need to have even before we get married. And as my husband was saying, we can't have this unrealistic expectation that marriage in itself is going to make us happy, or rescue me, or complete me, or fulfill me. Rather, we have to do that work and help the other person to do that work also.
That's a very important point, because sometimes people enter into marriage thinking that their spouse is going to make them fulfilled. Your spouse is going to solve all your problems and meet all your own shortcomings. But in reality, we have to be the best person we can be, that we have to do that internal work also. And it's also important that if you're looking to get married, that you should also look for someone else who is also doing that internal work to try to be the best they can be. And then together, the two of you can work towards having the best marriage you can possibly have by working together. But that also involves the two of you working on improving. Because if we just think my spouse has to do all the work to make the marriage better, that's not going to be a very favorable or balanced situation.
We also need to have a realistic short-term and long-term vision. We see that a lot of people today, they have unrealistic expectations financially. They see other people or even their parents, they have, a whole house full of all of the necessities they need. But as soon as you get married, you don't have all of those things. Those, gradually come over time until you get like us where there's way too many of them. So we do want to keep it realistic that everything doesn't happen at once. We have this instant need for gratification due to the pressure from our society. So we need to have patience and tolerance and realistically understand that we won't have all of everything at once. Our relationship will take time to grow. It takes time to get to know each other so that we can live with another person and cohabit congenially. So we have to be realistic about all of these things.
And also it's very important to have a proper understanding of what a Vaishnava marriage is. Sometimes there's kind of an unrealistic expectation, especially amongst men, that they think, I'm going to marry someone like Sita, and she's going to be the perfect wife. And they neglect to realize...
What about being like Lord Ram?
Yeah, they neglect that half of the equation. And sometimes we get maybe not quite the complete picture. We understand how, from our Shastras, that the wife is submissive to the husband. And unfortunately, that sometimes is not understood in a proper context either, because that can be taken to a vision that, well, my wife should just be subservient and should fulfill all my desires and obey all my commands. And that kind of reduces your wife or spouse to a domestic servant, which is not actually what a Vaishnava marriage is. Srila Prabhupada, he once described that if the husband thinks the wife is his servant, he said that's not very good. That will not be very good. And he said, if the wife does not serve the husband, he said, that is also not good. So on the other hand, we hear that the wife should serve the husband. She should be submissive. But Prabhupada is saying the opposite there. And then Prabhupada, in that dialogue, he said, if the husband gives the wife all protection, if he makes her feel loved and secure in that relationship, and spontaneously she's going to want to serve him. So that submission, it's not based on some authority structure or some Vedic edict. It's based on a reciprocation of mutual love. So that's the realistic Vaishnav version of marriage. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he described that if one is looking for a spouse, both husband and wife, both man and woman, they should only accept someone whom they see as a better servant of the Lord than themselves. So how are you going to do that? It's a bit of an enigma, a bit of a paradox. You have to find someone who's more advanced than you.
And I have to find someone more advanced than me. So we're going to be looking everywhere.
So the solution to that is both husband and wife have to have this sense of mutual respect and humility. And then the relationship becomes one of a reciprocation of love. So that is the proper Vaishnava understanding of marriage. It's not some edict.
I think that many of us have an unrealistic expectation of what love is and how love develops. Love actually develops by service. Just like we understand when we start to serve the deity, we start to develop love, whereas before we had no idea. Mothers, they very often love their child, but does the child do everything they want? No. Do they say, thank you, Mommy, for making me do my homework? Do they say, thank you, Mommy, for making me clean my room? No. But because we are offering that service to help them, we develop love. So I could make this big checklist of all the things that my husband should do for me. And if he did all those things for me for a whole month and I didn't do anything for him, I would not necessarily feel love, because love develops by service. So that's why it's very, very important to see that there has to be that mutual service attitude. And that's a realistic vision of love. Mm-hmm. That the more we do for someone else, the more we will feel love for them. And if that's reciprocal, then we will also be able to feel that love from them. So we have to be realistic about what love really is. It's not like my husband said, that fairy tale feeling. You know, feelings are a part of it, but how do we actually develop love? By service.
And part of that realistic vision is understanding, both husband and wife understanding what they need in the relationship. And somehow there's this idea, this paradigm that because my spouse loves me, they should know what I need, even if I don't communicate it. That's not very realistic because we cannot read minds. So as Uttama was saying, it's very important to have this open and honest communication in marriage to be able to express, what you need in your marriage to feel loved and connected. And that dialogue has to go back and forth. And another challenge that's especially there for devotees is sometimes as Vaishnavas, we think how a pure devotee, he doesn't have material desires. He's niskinchana, he's desireless. So we think that, well, if I'm trying to be a devotee, I shouldn't have needs. And then devotees will not communicate their needs or not express their needs. And that can also be very unrealistic and create all kinds of problems in marriage. So the realistic view is that as unique spirit souls, we all have a need for affection. Srila Prabhupada, he once described that affection was a symptom of life. He didn't just say it was a need, he didn't say it was just important, but he actually said it was a symptom of life. So in that sense, it's very important that we need individually to identify what are our own needs in terms of affection? What do I need to feel loved and protected and secure in this relationship? And you need to express that to your spouse. And you need to find out from your spouse what they need to feel loved and protected and secure in that relationship. So that creates a very realistic view of how you can meet each other's needs for affection in the relationship. And that's going to take some dialogue and some understanding. And again, in terms of a realistic vision, a part of that vision is, as we described in the earlier principle, how we are spiritually equally but materially different. And men and women have certain characteristics psychologically and physically that are unique. And for a marriage to be healthy, we need to understand each other in that regard so that we can function together as a team. And again, we can't just expect that's going to happen automatically, but it takes practice. And just like we were describing how in the beginning you don't see any differences, but the reality is in time your differences will become manifest, and it's going to take some time to learn to adjust to those differences, to learn to actually respect and honor the differences. Like my wife's a little relaxed and I'm maybe overly punctual, especially when it comes to going to airports. So that used to create a lot of tension in a relationship whenever it was time to travel, which we were doing a lot in the last 15 years. But we just learned how to manage that and respect each other's natures and come to some kind of mutual agreement that worked for both of us. But that takes dialogue and it takes patience, and in the beginning it takes tolerance. I was just discussing this with some devotees recently, how there's tolerance and then there's patience. Sometimes there's things that we have to tolerate. And there's a difference between tolerance and patience. If there's a bee sting, I tolerate that. It's very painful. If a mosquito bites, it's not as painful. I just have to be patient until the itch goes away. The degree of pain is less. But on a spiritual platform and on the platform of love, Prabhupada actually described once that there's a burden of the beast and there's a burden of love. There's two, there may be two situations. There may be a situation in which we need to develop this tolerance, And if that tolerance is tempered with love, we experience that as patience rather than just gritting our teeth and tolerance. So although in marriages, there may be points where we have to tolerate each other, by learning to work together, by learning that sense of respect, by understanding our duty to Guru and Krishna, that we have to learn to cooperate together for the pleasure of the household deity, then that tolerance, it becomes minimized to just something we're a little patient with. And so a part of that realistic vision is realizing that sometimes it may take some time to come from the tolerance platform to just the platform where we're patient with each other out of love. And that's normal.
I think that has a lot to do with one's personality also. Like some people can tolerate things easier than others. I notice that sometimes I'm not so tolerant, and that's more about what I'm going through than what my husband does. So I have to try not to project it on him, that he's the cause of why I'm irritated, but to be introspective and see, oh, I'm just tired, or, I'm hungry, or I had an expectation which I didn't communicate. And so therefore, my disappointment is making me irritated. But when I look internally, I see that I actually didn't communicate that expectation. And as my husband was saying, I did not marry a mystic yogi. He doesn't just know these things automatically, where I actually have to voice my expectations. So tolerance is definitely a quality that needs to be developed personally towards internally, to not react to one's own negative emotions when one doesn't get what they expected. So that's where I think tolerance really needs to be applied, that we have to internally apply it to relax our irritated feelings and to philosophically and intellectually understand them instead of just responding out of irritation. So having realistic expectations does actually require a lot of internal work.
That's important, extremely important point, that marriage does involve some work.
Gee, that's not very realistic.
And we'd rather it not, but we'd rather it would just be automatic and everything just happened easily without any endeavor. But in reality, we need to, as our god sister, she wrote a very beautiful poem in which she said how we have to be willing to do the work it takes to be a team, pray, and make less mistakes. And so there's work involved. It's the work of cleaning the heart. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he taught us that in the Shikshashtaka, that how we have to cleanse this heart and develop this humility and tolerance and patience and compassion. And that involves going deep within the heart and cleansing the heart and finding those things that are impeding our sense of connection with each other and with Krishna. And that takes effort. And it also takes some knowledge and some skills. And as we were saying earlier, how we have expectations about marriage. Maybe we have this fairy tale expectation. And maybe sometimes people have these, not exactly expectations, but conditionings from their upbringing that unfortunately many young people in today's age, they've come from broken families or very conflicted families. And So their vision of marriage often, they don't really have a reference point for what a healthy relationship is. So that makes it very hard to have a positive and realistic vision of marriage. And we've actually met many couples like that. When they enter into marriage, it makes it very hard for them to know how to deal with situations because they haven't seen it done in a healthy way. So if we're coming from that kind of a situation, it's not that we're lost or hopeless, but we simply have to find role models and get the skills necessary, learn how to communicate properly, understand how healthy dynamics work in marriage. Just like now we're having this discussion with the Russian Sangha, and in Moscow now there's a trained group of marriage mentors that can help couples to develop these qualities of communication and mutual respect, developing common goals, and utilizing their differences in a way that can actually strengthen their relationship. And so that's a very important part in developing this healthy view of marriage, is to get mentorship, to find someone who's mature and stable in their ashrams who can give you that kind of guidance.
I think I'll sum it up.
Okay.
So we need to not have that fairy tale, unrealistic expectation that we're just going to get married and live happily ever after. Rather, the realistic expectation is we're going to get married and we're going to begin the hard work of living happily ever after. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.